Hi everyone, welcome. Check this out. This is the feeding that the red wigglers are going to get. The red wiggler worms that live down here in the VermiBag Mini. It's just some watermelon rind, and I don't know why. I sometimes have these oddly shaped pieces of food which, for whatever reason, end up sitting in my freezer for ages before I finally tell myself, I'm getting sick of looking at this thing. It's time to just give it to the worms and be done with it. So before we dig in and get my hands all dirty, let me just share some info about the VermiBag Mini with you. And I guess one of the key things here, if you've been with me for any amount of time, you might know that the last time the VermiBag Mini was put into commission, it was in service for 700 days, which is now less than a month away. We're only 27 days away from this system matching and then eventually exceeding the greatest amount of time that I've ever had a single system operating. And I guess some other stats here. It's been 2 weeks since we last checked in on these little guys to feed them, and apologies for all that glare. Trying to find the right angle where you don't get a bunch of reflective light coming your way. And today's feeding is number 55, and something I've been doing in a lot of my systems is including something with my feedings, which is this ground up white substance here, which is Mosquito dunks. It's stuff that has proven to be useful to control flying insect populations in my worm bins. Sometimes getting me out of a real jam, helping me knock out flying insect infestations. So sometimes I'll put it in at the beginning and blend it in. Other times I'll add it at the end, and sometimes I'll do it both times. And I'm glad to report that most of my systems don't really show signs of any flying insect activity, but for whatever reason I'm definitely seeing a good bit of it over here. All I've got to do is kind of just sit and wait, and then the light reflecting off the wings of the little flying insects become visible. I'm not sure if it's coming through on the camera, but I can certainly see it from here. So even if I forget to add it at the end, at least we've sprinkled some in now to begin with. There's a nice little dent in the surface here, showing me that the feeding we gave them last time has, I guess, partially collapsed and presumably been partially, if not completely, consumed. I guess what I'm also curious to see is not if just the last feeding we gave them got consumed, but if some of the leftovers that we found from the feeding that came before are still here or not. Because something I've been noticing in a few of my systems is the persistence of certain foods, more specifically some Savoy cabbage that I had laying around, and the white color of it and the crunchiness. I don't know if you heard it already. It's crunching. I think this is some of it right here. All you gotta do is peel back some of the material to expose it. I've already gotten to the point in some cases where I've extracted the stuff because it seemed to me like it had not been adequately frozen to help kick off the breakdown process. And the sign of that was the fact that, number one, it's just still there, hasn't been consumed yet, because if the stuff does get thoroughly frozen, then as it thaws, it starts to become all mushy. Oops, let me get that piece back from the bench. The fact that this has been in here for, I don't even know how long it's been now. It's usually a couple weeks between feedings, so this is food that's been sitting around in here for close to a month with little sign of it breaking down. I suppose we could always extract it, and from what I remember, yeah, here it is. At the last feeding, I was taking this stuff and sort of adding it to the new foods that we were giving them. And right around here was where I placed it, and there's just something so obvious about its appearance. Kind of clean and white, almost shiny. And, I do believe that I'm going to kind of follow suit with what I've done elsewhere, which is to actually pull it out and just simply put it back in the freezer. Give it another chance at actually freezing through this time before I return it to a worm bin feeding. And I suppose it's a little ridiculous to start picking out pieces that small, but I did, just like I did earlier, I did get into the habit of trying to snap it and crack it and break it into smaller bits. But that doesn't really seem to help much. It just kind of takes the situation and spreads it around. And a lot of people would probably question the, I don't know, the sensibility or the usefulness of bothering. Probably doesn't make a whole lot of difference. So I guess over time, given enough time, it'll eventually start to break down. That is, of course, if it doesn't start to grow and maybe start developing roots and start to try to become a new plant, in which case it's definitely going against the grain of what we're trying to do in here, which is break down our kitchen scraps and create nice vermicompost, not start a little garden. It is funny when the worms start gardening. So I've not piled anything up over here. It still gives us a chance to see the level of the system relative to the little view window, because for the longest time the level was always kind of down at the bottom of the view window. Always making us wonder, well, are we ever going to see some increase to the amount of material in this system? And that was sort of a passive approach, thinking that if we just keep doing what we keep doing, we're going to see something different. And that's, I guess, a certain sign of insanity to keep doing the same thing and start expecting different results. So we decided to stop the insanity, and we jumped right into seeing what we could do about building out the system and increasing its amount of space for the wormies to be in. And it's probably been well over 6 months now that we really got on the generous bedding kick in here to try building up the system and increase the level. And I like the results. I like the way the level is finally starting to come up, and it's been coming up fast. So I've kind of dug down into the space where we last fed, but I don't know. I was actually thinking of a different approach to giving them this nice big chunk of food. My idea was to position it closer to the surface rather than submerging it as deep as I usually do. But I was definitely curious to see what the moisture level was like. In a way, I keep limiting myself to a certain depth where I dig down, but then I tell myself, hey, don't dig down any further, because in a way I want the lower levels of this system to kind of form into a undisturbed block of a mass of material, if you will, so that at some point when the time comes to harvest the castings out of this system, it's possible to do so without risk of the stuff coming flying out of here. Because the method for harvesting one of these systems is to open up a panel on the bottom and to let the stuff drop out. In most cases, you have to sort of scrape at it a little bit to dislodge material to let it out. And the whole idea is that the material that's still just above it is sort of a solid plug that's not going to just start into a cascading flow of material down out of the system. So, but you know what? Since we've got this big void here, perhaps what we can do is grab a lot of this leafy material that we scraped up off the top surface, which we applied as a nice top dressing last time, and just lay it right down here beneath the feeding zone, or where the feeding zone's going to be, which is, you know, dead center for the most part. Especially since I'm going to place the food right out on the surface for the most part. Because every now and then I see how other people are feeding their systems, and it's just pretty much leaving it for the worms out on the surface practically, and then just coming in with a little bit of bedding material after the fact. And I figured, why don't we take a similar approach? So at this point I'm really almost completely leveling the system off, and you know, some of these slow composting items, these 2 pumpkin stems that we've been tracking the progress of, The one stat that I forgot to write down is the age of that pumpkin stem, the big one, because it's really getting up there. It's much older than this system even, because it came with the worms from the environment that they used to live in. It was given to them and when they still lived in the yellow buckets, and then the yellow buckets were emptied in here as is, castings and all, meaning the stuff at the very bottom is actually the finished castings from the system that these worms lived in prior to they got moved into here. So I would think that the castings down there are really nice, and when the time comes to finally harvest the stuff, hopefully we'll end up with some really beautiful stuff. So I think the time has come to end our exploration of what's going on there. Besides the watermelon, I've got some coffee to give them. I figured I would combine that with a little bit of this prepared bedding of mine, kind of going in line with what I mentioned earlier, which is what I see other people doing frequently, which is just seeing the food go in fairly close to the surface, get sort of covered up with some fresh bedding, and then have a nice day. That's the way it gets delivered. These are composting worms who typically scour the surface of the forest floor looking for decomposing matter. So they're surface dwelling creatures that are used to finding their food on the surface. So to leave their feeding out on the surface, I assume, is a good way to play it. So I think we'll do it that way today. And I've got a little bit of leafy matter here left in my box that we can apply a final top dressing coating of, just to make it look pretty. And that's going to be our feeding for these little guys today. So let's get the top covers on. I did mention during I think it was only during the last check-in how moisture in here might have been starting to seem a little bit less than I'd seen in the past in recent times. So I even came prepared with my water bottle. It's right here next to me. I thought I'd give the system a squirt if I felt it was necessary to do so or useful to do so, but in the end I felt like the moisture level in here was quite nice. So I'm leaving it be. I'm hoping that that ring of watermelon is enough to sort of balance out the dry leafy matter we threw in on top. My prepared bedding is prepared moist, but it's not very moist. So it's almost like a wash. We didn't really introduce much moisture, but then again we also didn't introduce enough dry material here to send the system's moisture level plummeting. So I think we're going to be in good shape. So I guess we'll know next time we get in here. And it looks like my glove is nearing its end. I don't know. Do I wash it? Give it one more try? We'll see. I'll decide later. Alright, that's it for the check-in, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. Alright, everyone. Have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.